Hi, I'm Emily Uhas. I've been a product manager or in the product kind of role for about 10 years now. And one thing that I get asked a lot as a product manager or product lead from other people is whether or not they should consider switching over to product from another discipline. So I've heard this now from people who are product analysts, people who are in software engineering, and people who are in user research, as well as a few other roles. I think because product is so central, it's something that people have exposure to, and so it's naturally, they become curious about if it's the right role for them. So I have kind of a framework that I've come up with for helping people think through this decision that I wanted to share. So it's kind of three main parts. One is setting expectations. Two is thinking about if it's actually work that you like. And three is thinking about the career path. So starting with setting expectations, I think that's something that people don't realize is that even though product is at the center of many roles and therefore shares a lot of similar areas of expertise with other roles, it is its own discipline for a reason, and it has its own skills required that people learn and get better at over time. So if you think about roles as kind of like a Venn diagram, there's kind of product, and then there's things like software engineering, product analytics, user research, design, and they all have areas that overlap really closely with product. And so it's true that if you are one of those roles, there are some parts of being a product manager that you will be naturally set up to do well. But there are also other parts that you probably haven't done before. And so I think, a lot of people think it might be more like a lateral move to move into a product role. But the reality is that for most people, it will be kind of a career reset, like you are actually moving to a new role. And though you might come in really strong in some areas, there are other areas you basically have to learn from scratch. And I think, one area that most people have to learn from scratch because it is very core to product specifically is product sense. And something I personally didn't even understand as a junior PM is how important product sense is and how hard it is to even really get there without just time. And I think that, people come in, they think, oh, I have a lot of scope, I'm working on important strategy. But the reality is that product sense comes from many years of trying things, making decisions, succeeding, but really a lot of times failing and learning from that. And then what that gets you is the ability to evaluate and break down problems really quickly. So you get a new kind of big ambiguous problem, you kind of can immediately then cross out a bunch of areas that are likely to not work based on your experience, and kind of focus your team and your decision making in areas that you feel informed and you think are likely to work. And that actually, it sounds very kind of ambiguous, but it saves you a lot of time and it makes your work much more effective. And that's something that just comes after working through many, many, many types of problems. So I think that is really important to come in knowing that, you have a lot of valuable skills, but it's only a partial overlap with the role. And so think of it as like a true career pivot. The next one is thinking through if you actually like the kind of work that is being a product manager. So I think that people might not realize how highly collaborative the role is. So you should expect that there are days where you're just in back-to-back meetings all day, and maybe weeks, and maybe actually all the time. I mean, as I got more senior, that was basically my full day, is just back-to-back meetings 5 days a week. And then on top of that, you're getting through email and documents and presentations and all of the things to get kind of everyone aligned. And so that's something that I like, and that doesn't bother me, but I know there are people who hate that kind of day. So that's one thing to consider. Another is that there's this kind of this phrase out there that being a product manager is like being the CEO of your product. I think it's true in one way in particular, and that is that it's really like your butt on the line. So if you don't deliver the product and deliver value to the customers, then you failed at your role. Even if it's because an engineer on your team flaked out or didn't do something, or if your designer couldn't get on the same page, like ultimately it's your butt on the line as the product manager. Similar for a CEO, like ultimately if the company fails, even if it wasn't their fault directly, it's kind of their fault. So I think that's one thing that is true. The rest, in terms of like functional day to day, definitely not the same job. And then I think the other part that people think is, oh, like a CEO, a product manager is kind of like the key decision maker, and they might imagine that a product manager just kind of sits at their desks and makes all these decisions, and then everyone just has to do what they think is right. And that is also not true, and not a sign of a good product manager, at least. Most of your time is really spent being very collaborative, getting as much information from people as you can, and then you are kind of influencing and leading people in a direction. But like I said, you are not really the one that is directly executing on the work. And so it is a lot of kind of leading through influence, pitching why the thing you think you should work on is the best. It's very rarely kind of like making some decree that you've made a decision and everyone just kind of goes along with that. So I think that's one thing that kind of surprises people when they come to the role, is how much you have to depend on other people and communication and bringing people along to actually get something accomplished, but it is your fault if it doesn't get accomplished. The third thing is about your career. So I think, a lot of people consider moving to product when they've maybe hit a point in their career that they're not really happy with. Maybe they've reached a senior role and they're not really sure if management or continuing to be a senior IC in that role is the right thing for them. First of all, I would just say that it's the exact same path in product. So that's kind of a wall you have to hit in any role. And so if it's something particular to like being a manager or being a senior IC, that is not role specific, and you should think deeply about why it is that you're kind of stuck at that crossroads, and if it would actually be different in product. And then think through, like, maybe if it is, do you actually want to end up, like, if you are like ultimately successful in the career ladder in product, do you want to end up being a VP of product? Do you want to end up being a very senior IC in product, and why? And if you can kind of get to that point where you say, like, yes, that's the role that I want eventually, that's what I want to work towards, then I think you're in a good place. If it's just that kind of you've gotten frustrated with, hitting a point of seniority in your current role, then it might not be the best way to solve that problem. So I think those are some important things to think through. And of course, there are some people who make this move and they're so happy and it was the right thing for them and they're really great product managers. And then there's some people who make the move and kind of realize that they've given up on this area that they actually had a pretty senior level of expertise in, and move to an area where they are pretty junior and have a lot to make up. And maybe it's not exactly kind of what they pictured or the career path that they thought they wanted. So I think, there's no right or wrong answer. It's all about what you want, but just those are some great things to think through before you actually make the change. Thanks.